So assessors, water, IT, golf, and wastewater.
Morning, Donna.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Do you want to do an overall, just go directly to questions, or do you want to do, it's up to you.
Whatever works best, I can,
Just do a simple,
yeah.
quick overview.
What page are we on, Chris?
232.
I'm sorry, assessor is 152.
152.
Oh, assessor, I'm sorry.
152.
I went to golf.
Janice, Lyon.
Yeah, I did.
okay, so, this year, the budget, the salaries, went up 10.72%. And on the data processing, which is our vendor PK valuations, we went up 0.38%. And the reason for the increase in the salaries is the SEIU contracts changed. They went up a step. And then also, I plan on doing a two-step increase for one of the employees in the department. And PK valuations is, they just go up a little bit each year. It's pretty minimal.
Any questions from the board?
I have no question.
Not this time.
Ed?
Anticlimactic.
Turn it over to you, Dana.
Coming down. John?
No questions, thank you. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not done.
That was a good try.
I have two, and one is just talk to us a little bit about the overtime, the 13,000. Do you use that?
Yes, we do, because we have such a small staff in the time, and when it's busy, we do use it.
Okay, and do we still pay our assessors a fee? The three assessors,
Yes,
do they
we
still
do.
get a
We pay
stipend?
them $500 a year, and I wanted to speak to you in the future about that.
Okay,
I don't think they get included in the review last year of the salary adjustment.
No, they did not.
That was really a finance effort to look at the different people that were compensated, although you were looking at elected officials.
right. Now, yeah, that's exactly my point. These are appointed, there's what, still two areas of appointed people where you give them a stipend. And it's certainly something we should address, because if they all of a sudden become eligible for increases and other things that go with that, I see that as a problem for volunteers.
Any other questions?
That's all I
Ed?
Not so much a question, just a comment that over this course of this past year, several issues that were problematic that brought to the Assessor's Department and all got great service to some very confusing issues, and I'm very impressed with the operation.
Thank you for that, Ed.
Where it's under the assessing, this is also where we have the overlay account. Is that where we would talk about that?
Yeah, that would be fine to talk about it here. I don't believe we made any adjustment, 460,000, and we kept it level fund from last year. We had been increasing it each year by about $10,000, and we've decided to kind of let it stay at that level for a little bit before we make any additional
A
adjustments.
little bit, 2 or 3 decades. Can you give us a breakdown? I know it's changed. I know it's not yearly anymore. I mean, it's yearly, it's not the 3
We
year.
can give you a status.
Can we give a
as to where we are.
breakdown of how much we actually use each year versus how much we tie up? Because that's a 2-for-1 budget item. You have to raise $2 for every dollar you get back. That 100,000 we get back, you pay.
And just in terms of that, in the budget, we do have that, we have the 460,000 is raised each year. That goes for people that question their taxes and pay that off. That tends to be a longer process sometimes, so we have to keep that money. And to your point, I think now we can adjust for different years. But then we also do, the Board of Assessors votes to give back overlay surplus of about 100,000 a year, and that is built into this budget module.
But it costs
to
us
have the
200,000 to make that 100,000, so.
you gotta put the money aside per the overlay requirements. And the overlay requirements aren't just for people that pay the taxes, it's also for all the abatements
Yeah,
that are.
I understand how it works. I just want to get a breakdown of where we are, of the
Yeah,
history.
no, we can get you a
Yes,
breakdown.
yeah.
And I realize you understand that. I just, folks at home watch, and not everyone understands when we talk about what
I
these
understand.
different elements are.
Thank you.
That ends my questions.
Thank you,
Thank you, Donna. Thanks
Thank
for your
you.
hard work.
thank you.
Next up is water,
432, I believe.
page 432.
Heard it here first.
Morning, how are you?
Morning. Let me introduce Water Commissioners Judith Underwood, Gary Carrero, myself, Alan Thompson, and our Superintendent, Dan Pelletier. And we got new members on the Finance Committee.
Yeah, why don't you go down and introduce yourselves?
Angelo.
Angelo, you know,
Dan Twark.
John Chory? Tom Sherry?
Dana DeCosta, you know me.
All right. So how would you like to do this? Go over the questions first?
I think people have been doing a general overview, maybe
Just to
three
do a,
three to
do a
5 minutes.
thumbnail of your budget and talk about it for a minute, and then if we have questions, we'll ask.
All right, so here we are. Let me just do the questions, and that should add, the questions, the standard questions. What are the differences between fiscal year 19 budget and fiscal 20 proposed budget? The proposed fiscal year 20 budget reflects an overall increase of 2.1% over the fiscal year 19 budget. This equates to a dollar increase of $89,680. What are the reasons for the increases and decreases? Salary and wages. The salary and wages increased a total of 5.5%, $69,635 from the fiscal year 19 budget. This is a result of a market adjustment settlement during the contract negotiations for fiscal year 19. Also, operating expenses increased a total of 1.2%, $26,669 from the fiscal year 19 budget. The operating expense category was developed from fiscal year 18 actual expenses and fiscal year 19 trends. Are you adding or reducing any personnel or hours? There are no current plans to add or reduce personnel or hours. What are your top budgeting priorities for fiscal year 19? One of the main things that have come about is the funding the increase into the meters, read devices, and supply line item 90,000. The department has identified 715 water meters in town that are over 30 years old. When meters age, they tend to become less accurate and under register water consumption, resulting in a loss of revenue. This is intended to be an ongoing project to address all meters over 15 years of age. The other thing that's out there on meters will be, as the wastewater moves along, second meters for irrigation. Are there any expenses that could be deferred? What would be the impact? Should the requested increase be deferred, it would result in additional lost revenue for the department. A recap of revenues anticipated and their sources. Revenue is generated from the sale of water and other various services department offers, including water service installations, mark-out services, wireless communication lease agreements, solar revenue, backflow inspection services, and watertight service protection plan fees. Are there any pricing or fee changes proposed? The department recently revised its capital plan and contracted with an outside firm to review the financial impacts of funding for future capital improvement projects. The results from the outside firm have not yet been presented, but it is anticipated a rate increase will be required in the near future to fund upcoming projects. Any revolving funds or receipts reserved, changes proposed, and for what reason? None.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Larry?
We've had some interesting water main breaks in the last couple of years. Is this built into the budget or capital items? How are you addressing those items?
Well, let me put Dan on that one.
Yeah, so, likely, presume you're talking about the ones on Route 28.
Sure.
So as part of the capital plan revision, we do have monies in there for engineering and then construction to replace the water main on Route 28 within the next 2 years.
Okay, so that's part of this year's budget then,
No, it's not part of this year's capital request. It's for next year's capital request for engineering monies.
so you're able to transfer funds this year to cover, I know you're doing some work.
Yeah, so the one that was on Lothrop Ave
Right.
that broke. So I actually met with, or discussed this with Chris and Carol last week. It's our goal to get that water main repaired prior to summer season. So the method to accomplish that is going to be funding the project out of our operating budget. And if we do run short, that we would have an article at town meeting to fund the shortfalls for that. I did get a preliminary estimate from one of the drillers that's gonna be around $100,000 to replace that main there.
Just, Madam Chair, just for that, we do have one of the articles that allow for transfers within the existing fiscal year, so we would use that as a vehicle and identify the funding sources from either the water operating budget or their retained earnings.
Right,
And just
thank you.
another thing to note on that too, the Lower County Road project does have around $75,000 left. That project is
Right.
completed. So if it does come out of, if we do need to move money from retained earnings, when that gets certified this upcoming year, that would offset that transfer.
Thank you. Second question is regarding the Lothrop tank at ground level. How's that working out financially? Is it as you expected?
Yeah, so I was actually going over this yesterday. So I need to really go through and do a very detailed analysis of electric consumption. When we had originally looked at that project, we had estimated the electric utility would be around 25,000, and that was 3 or 4 years ago. So this past year, it was around 45,000. But what I want to, and the reason I was saying I want to do a detailed look is because when I go through the pumping records every month, especially this time of year during the off-season, we run that pump station for 4 hours a day. So we fill it for 4 hours a day, and we pump water out 4 hours a day in the winter just to cycle the water through to keep it fresh. Now, when we're operating that tank in the winter, there are times where we pump that out for 4 hours, and because that's feeding the distribution system, the 14 wells throughout the department don't run. We may only pump 200,000 gallons from our distribution system wells as opposed to 800,000. So one of the things that I want to do to make sure, go
You
through
really have to net it out then, that's what you're saying.
Right, exactly, and I haven't gone through that exercise, but that's, because the electric costs are higher than what I anticipated for that one station, I want to see what offsets there are for the other ones. So that is something that we're going to be looking into.
Thank you.
Ed? Don? Michael?
Only question I have, well, two questions. Munis report, you mentioned 5% labor cost, additional labor costs. The Munis report says 8%. What's the difference there? 8.78 on the
Yeah,
Munis.
so the salaries and wages was 8.78, or I have 8.8%. Included in that salary and wage category is seasonal overtime, flushing overtime, longevity bonuses. So all of the line items within salary and wages comes to 5.5%. But the actual hourly wages for employees was the 8.8.
Thank you. And then on the capital request for a new F-550.
Yeah.
You're going from a 350 to a 550. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so the 350 we have right now is completely deteriorated. So that needed to be replaced. The reasons we went from a 350 to a 550 are for additional towing capacity, and as well, we'll be able to get a larger dump body on it. So when we're out there repairing the water main breaks, we only have 2 vehicles that can move dirt, and we have 2 vehicles that can tow. So it's gonna aid in those, water main break restorations to be able to have 2 trucks running back and forth instead of 1. Gets also the additional capacity of the vehicle. I mean, when we're in groundwater, it's a very heavy load for these vehicles to carry, so.
Thank you.
These vehicles plow snow too, for the town and for the department.
Thank you.
Ed?
You raised that question on Monday, and I looked, and the capacity, carrying capacity goes from about 6,000 pounds to over 11,000 pounds, so you can move a lot more water-soaked dirt
Yeah.
from a site.
And it's the 24-hour-long breaks when it's 6 in the morning the next day, and we're trying to run material back and forth to get the bowl backfilled with dry, clean fill, that's really gonna be it.
Thank you.
Just on that, how often do you tow?
Every day.
Every day?
Just
You're
about. I
towing
mean,
something every day?
Yeah, our digging crew during digging season is towing just about every day.
I think I had the same question only because the F-350s of today are much better than the F-350 you're replacing.
Yeah, so, this also comes as a recommendation from the DPW. They do all of our vehicle maintenance, and they're aware of what we do on a daily basis, and we're also taking their recommendation,
Can we
too.
bring them back? No.
I told Kyle I was gonna,
Never mind.
Any other questions?
Questions from the finance committee?
Just a sort of a question. You mentioned that you have to replace about 30% or so of the measurement devices, and that you'd have to take perhaps a fee increase. My question is, how much money do you earn from your revenue this year, for example, and how much do you have left over from this year? So, I mean, do you have a large amount of money left over?
Yeah, so I believe it was last year or the year before, the board moved to budget a 10% surplus in revenue to put towards retained earnings for capital projects. So as a best practice for our budgeting purposes, if our operating budget's $4 million, we try to put 400,000 into retained earnings. The read devices is a little bit different. So that I would consider more of an operational component of the department as opposed to like a capital improvement project. So we have about 10,000 water meters in the distribution system, and as they age out, as Alan mentioned, they become less accurate. So the target age is 15 years and replacing them on a 15-year cycle. So the monies that we're requesting this year for that was it 300,000, I believe, or 190,000. We're doubling. We have a $300,000 backlog of meters over 30 years old right now. So what we're trying to do is increase that and get ahead of it.
I understand that. That's not where my issue is. This year, you're going to generate X dollars in revenue. And what you're going to do with that is you're going to spend some of it on your operational budgets and put 10% away. Do you have any other money left over? That's my question.
As far as retained earnings?
No, I didn't say return earnings. You collect X revenue and you spend X revenue. Do you have money left over in the, you know, you charge the town X dollars. What's that number?
For this year, we have an anticipated revenue of around 5 million.
Okay, and how much is your expenditures?
The full expense budget is, 4,327,978.
So there's $700,000 floating
Right.
around.
Again, this is
So how much?
estimated revenue.
Okay, I know, but there,
We don't know.
what I'm saying is potentially by the time you get to the meters, you should have funds left over.
Doesn't work that way. You know, we have such a backlog of projects. I mean, we just completed $1 million project on Lower County Road. We got all kinds of those. We got a multi-million-dollar Route 28 project. That main's been in there since the 40s. Let me tell you, there isn't enough money in the next few years, you know, in leftover funds to do that project. But we're gonna have to face it, we're gonna have to segment it, and so as far as the day and age of a free ride for water, I mean, it's gone.
I just want to make sure I understand your question. So with our operating budget of 4.3 million and the budgeted surplus of 400,000, there's a remaining 276,000. Is that what you're referring to?
That's what I was
Yeah,
curious.
so we can't spend that 276,000.
I understand.
It would ultimately have to fall to retained earnings in order for us to access those funds.
It's fine, I understand.
So, your question was,
That's
what,
fine.
can we spend that, or?
No, I just wanted to know how much was left over, that potentially, because you're one of the 3 or 4 departments that generate your own revenue, and most of the other departments have money that's left over to do various things. And I know that whatever money you generate should be used on water stuff, but I was just wondering if there's some around.
Yeah, another thing to note too, you know, that 276,000 can go very fast.
I
If we have a
understand.
wet spring, I mean, we could underbill our summer, fall bill by that much.
Chris?
Yeah, I was just gonna try to elaborate a little bit. You know, I did rates in my last town for 6 years, and, you know, the challenge with water and sewer is if it's raining a lot, you're not gonna bring in as much. If it doesn't rain, you're gonna be making more. So having a margin of error when you're setting fees
That's fine.
is, I think, kind of an important part for the water.
John?
No question. Wow. I'm trying to find the answer here. They can't find it.
Oh, I didn't, Dan?
No questions.
You have
I'm good, thank you.
my turn, right? Just to let you know, the Finance Committee did vote to support your other articles. We didn't take a position on the 550 because we wanted to hear
Yeah.
what you had to say about that. When was the enterprise fund created?
6.
2006. And as we talked about it back then, the purpose was to catch up on some of this backlog.
You know, the thing of it is.
Are you treading water or are you catching up?
No, we're treading water. You know the history, you know how it went, how it used to be. You know, and I mean, I have to say, the department has come an awful long way, and thank God it was changed, you know, and that it finally could stand on its own and do its own thing. I mean, because, we're trying to stay ahead of the road projects going on in town. You know, but a lot of them come faster than we have the funding to do. Currently, we're holding money for Great Western Road. That's about 450,000. It was a couple of years ago, but Lower County took its place. But there's an awful lot of stuff like that. And then as we go along, the lot of Bab was kind of a surprise. There's a case there with the water main there is in good shape partway, but where it went through the salt water, it's kind of rotted away. And like I said, Route 28 is 1944, something 42, or maybe even earlier. I mean, some of that has transite or asbestos main, things like that, at some point it'll all have to be updated, you know? So if we don't do any projects and just save up money, just so we could do segments of 28 over the next 10, 15 years, you know, just, again, you know, once they repave or rebuild 28, it makes it that much harder to do anything. So,
Another thing too on the meters, so the department did, so meters are comprised of two components. There's the meter body and the meter head. So when the department began its transition to radio reads a number of years ago, the decision was made to replace all of the meter heads. Now, the part that's registering the water in the meter body, it's called a nutating disc. So as water passes through the meter, it goes like this. And over time, those wear out. So when the decision was made several years ago to replace all the heads, that still left a number of very old meter bodies out there. So that's the part that we're trying to catch up with now.
Okay. Answers my question.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for your hard work, and I also want to acknowledge how important water is, and it's becoming such a worldwide issue, so I appreciate that we have a great system in town, and you all contribute to it. Also, in terms of the comments about aging water mains, which is a huge concern. And I'm wondering if you're thinking of, or maybe you've already started to try to analyze across town aging water mains in some ways to format a capital plan that we can plan better for. So that's my first question.
Yeah. So, I think it was 2012, the department created or developed a 30-year master plan, and that was identified all of the aging infrastructure in town and put together a capital improvement plan to replace those. So we've followed that and kind of cherry-picked problem areas. You know, at this point, we're up against hundreds of thousands of feet of water main that, you know, need to be replaced. So if there are areas that have been identified that haven't been problematic to date, we'll, you know, move something else up. Obviously, 28 has been a big issue for us, so that's kind of taken precedent. Another thing that I did more recently than that master plan, I actually sat through a webinar / sales thing with this company who uses AI to determine, based on break history, installation date, and a number of other factors. They have an algorithm that goes in and identifies high-risk mains. And if it's maybe something that we can't fund the replacement of a water main, it gives the opportunity to make sure that we have really good functioning water main gate valves, so that if there is a break, we can isolate it. You know, there are a lot of ungated connections between transmission mains and distribution mains. That's, you know, one of my priorities to get gate valves installed, because when we have those big breaks on 28, some of them required over 25 gate valves to be shut down, and it expands the impact area. So we're kind of fighting two battles, replacing the water mains, but also gate valves, so that when they break, you know, the impact is smaller.
That's great. And the only other question I have, and I've asked it before, and I don't know where we stand on it, it doesn't really impact your budget, I guess, technically right now, but is the irrigation meters once we have sewer.
On the
and-
wastewater piece.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, so the board did take a vote to support irrigation meters for residents who hook up to sewer. I have talked to a number of residents about, you know, people call and say, oh, it's, you know, we're gonna have an irrigation meter. So there's obviously a lot of detail to still work out before that gets implemented. Fortunately, we have a couple years. You know, the thought now is that, you know, for meter reading for wastewater, we would read the water meter, and then we would deduct all the water that goes through the irrigation meter, and that would be used to generate the sewer bill. Because the irrigation meters are installed on household plumbing, for liability reasons, the homeowners are gonna have to have a plumber install that meter. But it gives us an opportunity to make sure that people who have irrigation have a testable backflow device, they're installed properly, and that we have, you know, good records, so.
okay, that's great. Thank you. Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back to Dana's and Angelo's comments about, for the folks who are watching this, about the enterprise fund. I consider the enterprise fund's creation to be one of the single best things we ever did for financial management here. The water department was essentially used as a checking account for a lot of years for other municipal purposes, and unlike the other revolving funds you're talking about, ratepayers, who may be the same person as a taxpayer but may not be, ratepayers were actually subsidizing projects on the general municipal side. Even if you're just treading water now, it could have been a lot worse, because ultimately the government has a tendency to wait for things to break. There's tons of capital items within your department, all those pipes, all of the infrastructure. If we hadn't come up with some sane way of making sure that money didn't go somewhere else, we would not be anywhere near where we're at today.
Dana?
Just on that comment, I've heard that for a long time, and I can't speak for before I was a selectman and after I was a selectman, when we were selectmen together. But during that 6-year period, we spent more on water than they brought in, just during that 6-year period. We needed to do more of that across the board, but certainly during that time, you and I, we were spending money on water because we knew this problem existed.
But now it doesn't rely on any one person.
Yep.
You know, and part of when we went through with the outside consultant to review our financials, our capital plan, you know, once we receive the deliverables, you know, which will likely next budget cycle when we're going through this, we'll have a much better financial forecast and presentation, because there's a lot of things in the deliverables that we're going to receive that really lay out what the impacts of a rate increase are for capital projects, not just now, but 10 years from now, and what the rates will need to look like to fund those, if we fund them or want to fund them out of free, you know, retained earnings, or if we want to take out a loan, what the impacts will be. So it's a very comprehensive overview, and it also takes into account, you know, affordability, low income, what the impacts on low income residents would be, if it would be a financial burden, things like that. So it's really excited to have it.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? I think that we're all set. Thank you very much. And again, thanks for all you do.
Chance.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
No, that's not true, Alan. We can call
Next
you guys.
We can bring you back.
You know, before
We haven't voted yet.
let me just say a quick thing about owners unknown parcels. You know, it's something that's been going on for years and years and years, for way back. When you think about, I can recall as a teenager in the coffee shop, this fellow Joe would say, hey, what are you doing with that piece of land down there where you just cut the trees? Nothing. You want it? And it's yours. Just like that, you know, and that was the end of it. And, you know, whether one went and got a deed or ever followed through, probably not. But it piled up over the years. And then you go back to 1800s, you know, when the men all ran the show, you know. They could have owned acres of land, but never told the family, you know. He dies and
Nobody knows.
there you have it, you know. And I have to say, the town spent an awful lot of money over the years trying to clean up those titles. Lots of money. We used to have off-Cape firms, we had local lawyers, we had town attorneys, spent a lot of money. I mean, there's not much there now, as much as there used to be.
Well, you've been here since the 1800s. You should have kept track.
It's right in front of me, really.
Thank
It's
you.
always a pleasure.
Thank you.
IT is next.
Got rid of them.
Page are we on, Chris?
Oops, sorry.
172.
172, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning, Foster.
I'm Foster Banford, your IT director, for those who haven't met. The IT budget this year has and it's two components. The personnel section has a expanded resource in it that I think is the only one to survive this far, and we are looking for an additional person. That request was in the budget last year, but didn't survive the final cuts. When it was removed from the budget, the board asked for some further studies to substantiate the need and how we would use that person. And there was some money in the budget to hire the county to provide some support for the IT, and to commission them to do a study to, let's say, enhance the study, take the study that we had already gone through and presented, and take a further look at it and substantiate what we found and make further recommendations. So that study was completed and presented to the board in January. It did seem to substantiate the need for IT support, and we've included that in this year's budget. Without going into a lot of detail, I hope hopefully, of course, the results of this study are available in a 20-page document. But the number one recommendation was to augment the IT staff. Just to start out, it states currently there is only one full-time equivalent IT employee within the town. Apart from being below average and nationally and regionally, represents a single point of failure that presents risks to the entire organization. I'm not sure I like being a point of failure, but
You're a success, don't worry about it.
but I think the point being made that with only one person here, there's no backup. It is a risk to part of the needs of the town that could sustain an outage, basically. So, further on the study, they did compare the staffing of the town of Harwich versus other towns. It's always a little hard to do apples versus apples here. But they did find that the town of Harwich having just one staff compared to the other towns in the area that are similarly sized, they were 2 or 3 people. So there's a lot of detail in here, a lot of recommendations. We're trying to follow through on, but I believe they do support the need for additional staff. So that's reflected in the budget. There is a recommended, there's actually a couple of sections of the job descriptions which we will need to work on further if this is approved, and get it tuned for what Harwich needs. But it does look for experienced network administrator type person that can be a significant aid. Looking for more than a help desk, which we described last year, and an experienced IT person to be able to assist the IT director. So, why don't we take questions on that part of the...
Right, and Foster said thank you very much, first of all, for working, you and Scott Tilsley, for putting in all that extra effort and helping out with that survey and with the county. And to your point, you gave us a great presentation back in January, and the realities are there, because you certainly are not a point of failure. You've been a success for us, and you need some help. I mean, you're pulled in 8,000 different directions. So we appreciate you taking the time this morning to go through your reasonings of what you guys see in front of you. So, questions from the board? Michael?
I have no questions.
Don?
It's more of a comment. I just want to be clear with everybody. You and I have talked about this directly over the last year. What we got going on in here is help with you about the structural part of this. There is a component of using computers and electronics that we've migrated into over the last 10 years, where information flow and the protection of that and administration of that is also a concern with records retention and all that kind of stuff. Nothing in this addresses that. What you're talking about is a backup for you particularly, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I mean, it's just like we haven't been able to get our arms around that second problem, about an information technology specialist, for instance. This addresses the wires, the boxes, and the software. Correct?
I think it will enhance, you know, it does provide a backup, but I do believe that we will be able to provide more services to the town in areas like, you know, document management, cybersecurity, online permitting needs more work. You know, we need to get our Assessor system enhanced, continue to enhance it and pushed out to the public so people can do their work from home and not show up here at the counter. I think it will definitely help in all those areas too, as well as provide that backup to me.
But it's not intended specifically for that.
Correct, yeah.
Ed?
No.
Larry?
Foster, thanks for all your work and help me when I call in. But let me follow up to your comment on Excella, because there's been some problems in the past. Now, your comment is that you hope to bring some of those repair mechanisms in-house versus now we're relying, I think, more on county support, or how do you see narrowing that gap to provide a, you know, upgrade the service from what it is now?
Yes, I do feel that we need more in-house support on Acela. The county has provided some support initially where they had a support person that worked 100% of his time on Acela. And he spent one day a week here. That person was let go in one of their budget cuts, and then, I don't know, 6 months or a year later, brought back. But when he came back, he had duties in other areas also. So he continues to assist us, but I don't think we can count on that for the long term. I mean, I think there should be some assistance there, but we need to make our own way, and a person in the IT department working closely with building will know their needs and I think be able to provide those enhancements to make Acela work better.
But that's not part of this year's budget then? That's something you look forward to next year's budget to putting that in?
Well, I think this person
Well,
Yeah,
well,
I think
free
the
up
idea
some
behind trying to have the network administrator is
Well,
to
he'll
then
pick
go
up the
around to
Excella.
individual departments and see how can we make them more efficient. So there's been a change in terms of the work that's being anticipated to come from this person would be a network administrator. So a little bit different really than what Foster's doing as the overall IT. But we're trying to go and have it be department specific. To the point about Acela, which I think is really your
Right.
question, Larry, is Acela is a platform that the county had said that they would continue to support. Their support has been a little bit up and down, and quite honestly, Acela has been bought 3 times in the last 3 years. So we're now working on a Berkshire Hathaway now owned company that actually owns Acela. They've made some efforts to improve, but I think what we're trying to do is to enhance and improve the portions of Acela that work for the town of Harwich. And we're not doing anything different than what Yarmouth's doing, or P-Town's doing, or others that have that product. So I think what Foster's kind of saying is that the county may not always provide that support for Acela, and we may be needing to do more over time. At least at this point, the county has.
I'm only
committed to-
driving that, we have great hopes for Acela helping us out. I want to be sure we're moving towards getting to the end point where it helps us do the things we'd hoped for. The second question I have is regarding Munis. We've talked, I think several times, general discussions about there are things we could add to Munis to help us out. Do you feel we've added the the items we need to, the add-ons, or using those, or do we need to do more to take full advantage of Munis?
Well, we need to do more to utilize what we already have, what we already own in Munis. So
And
we
then
have
we're-
several modules
Yeah.
that are not fully implemented.
And that's because of training, or what?
It's because of resources in my department and the finance department, I guess,
Okay.
to some degree. But,
And this person will help pick that up as well, you think, so we can fully
Yes.
utilize Munis?
I mean, it is a backup for me, as it's described here, but they're not gonna just sit around waiting for me to need a backup.
No, I
You know,
appreciate
it's-
that, you're doing a lot of stuff, my questions are, you know, we have Excel and Munis that we hope to take, and we're not taking full advantage of them,
Mm-hmm.
as far
Yes.
as I can tell. And I just wanna be sure we're taking steps to go that way.
We've made
in the
progress
budget.
in both of those
I
areas,
realize that, yeah.
but it's not as fast as we'd like it to be, so, these resources will allow us to
And
move
you're
right
comfortable
along.
moving in the right direction to get that
Yeah,
done.
I think so.
Thank you, Foster.
Thank you, Larry. And to that point, I think we also know that working with the commission's been helpful because it hasn't cost us as much money, but they can't figure it all out for us.
Oh, I didn't see
We
that.
have other,
I think, not to degrade the commission,
Go
I
ahead.
think the will is there, but the functionality is not.
right.
So the reality is that they were successful of doing the review. So in the last year, we've done a cyber audit, which I won't get into detail, but we've done a cyber audit to assess the town's capabilities for our cyber system. And then they did come in and do the overall plan of doing the report. So we now know that we need a network administrator. We now know how we want to focus that additional resource a little bit better than we had before. The part that they had was to provide additional backup to Foster. And, quite honestly, I think just from their staffing, I mean, they have a hard time coming down, they have a hard time coordinating with us, and then we need to find projects that they can do to then utilize. But we get back to having one person trying to do additional coordination. And so we are running into a little bit of a challenge with that. But the board gave us money last year, we're gonna try to use as much as we can, but the county has several other communities they're doing.
Right.
So their resources are somewhat limited too.
Thank you, Chris. Ed?
Yeah, and the county's problem is it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing, the financial powers that be in the county want the contracts in place first before they hire the employees, but if you sell the contract and it takes you 6 months to start providing the service because you then have to amend the budget to authorize the personnel. It's sort of, it's like a store opening up and not having anything to sell.
Right, right.
It's
Yeah.
sort of, so they need to be willing to invest some money to have the resources available.
Mhm.
To offer so they can offer the services realistically.
Right. Thank you, Ed. Dana?
John?
Angela?
No,
Are
we've
you-
already.
We put it down to
Must
you.
have been sleeping. This person, Foster, that you're looking to add to your staff, what's the salary anticipation that you're gonna be?
It was about
69,000.
940, just under 70,000.
I'm not an IT guy at all, but 69 seems awful low in this IT environment out there. I wonder what type of qualifications you're gonna be specifying and what you're gonna get to apply for $69,000.
I agree.
I'm just asking the question. Again, I'm not an IT guy.
And we don't know. Which there are people around who have moved here and have a lot of experience and are, looking to keep working a while. Those are possibilities. It could be, we do need somebody with some experience, so it can't be somebody right out of school. So, although it could be a person that needs a little more seasoning and would be good experience for a few years. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of response we get, because you're right. If it wasn't Cape Cod, the salary would be a lot higher.
But-
It's hard to get anybody under 100,000 now in IT experience.
But that's exactly what it's, I did work for a major corporation, and IT people were always hard to get, and well over 100,000. And what I've been hearing in other wages and salaries, the town is not in the highest end of these salaries, and we are losing people quite often that are leaving because for higher salaries. And, you know, are we starting off, I don't know how a study was done or anything, it just seems awful low to me.
Well, we didn't do a study on salary. This salary was based on really what was available to us in the existing salary grids. This is the highest point in salary grid that we have that's not management.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
Good luck.
on that cherry note.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm agreeing, I mean, that's way too low to get, you know, somebody of quality in. But over and above that, have you thought about like maybe going into tech and getting a couple co-op students to help as far as some of the mechanics go and hook things up? Because they're fairly well trained, and it would, you know, might sweeten the pot, if you will, to, you know, if you have the $70,000 job, plus a helper.
Yeah.
And it might make it a little more attractive to somebody coming on.
We've had some discussions on that, and actually we're talking with a potential intern right now.
But the tech school in town is a great resource if you want to, you know, touch base with their IT department.
I think there's a possibility there. Sometimes with getting an intern in, there's the risk of spending more time on them than
Yeah, have.
the value you get out.
Right.
That's my worry about it.
And then they leave.
Thank you.
I'm all set, thank you.
Thank you very much, Foster, appreciate it. And again, appreciate all you've done for all the various departments. I know you're one person, and it's not been easy.
Next up is golf.
Yeah. Thank you again, Foster.
Thanks.
Golf is on 331.
Morning.
Morning.
My name is Roman Greer. I'm the Director of Golf for the town of Harwich and Cranberry Valley Golf Course. I'll do a brief overview of what's on tap for FY20 at the golf course. We expect an increase in facility usage by town residents now the town fee paying public to continue. Successful partnerships with the Hot Stove and Miller Golf Instruction will continue due to their extended contracts. Cranberry Valley will once again host the state championship, the Mass Golf Junior Girls Championship on August 5th and 6th. Also on the calendar is the PGA Junior League Northeast Regional Championship in September and the Capes Only Drive Chip and Putt Qualifier. These events will continue to showcase Cranberry Valley and Harwich and will impact the local economy positively. 2 town meeting articles are going forward for golf course projects. The landscape reclamation project is in its final phase, and the bunker renovation project as well. That'll both be paid out of the Golf Improvement Fund. Considerations when building the FY20 budget were the increase in facility usage, 4th straight year of increase in total members. League and tournament participation are at the highest levels we've ever had. Cranberry Valley is the busiest 18-hole facility on Cape. And in FY18, we hit an all-time high in revenue at $1.85 million. As far as the actual budget request, we kept it pretty lean. We have a pretty good formula going. Salaries and wages, we had no new hires, no new hours. So any changes are the result of collective bargaining contracts, new personnel bylaws, and salary adjustments based on the compensation study. Another change was the hot stove contract dictated a $2,500 increase to line 524300 maintenance and repair service to cover an annual maintenance contract on the restaurant equipment. Other changes were just the result of increased facility usage, such as line 530300 data processing. We had an increase in card usage, so we went with FY18's actual numbers there. 534100 advertising, we're requesting a $3,000 increase just to cover the increasing costs of marketing. 548900 vehicle supplies and parts, we went with FY18 actuals on that number. And 558000 other supplies. which is range balls and member supplies. We request a $2,000 increase just based on more members and more usage of the driving range. That's a summary.
Just
Thank you,
Yeah.
one comment too in regards to golf. What we've really started to do organizationally is the state minimum wage has gone up, and it actually goes up $1 a year for 3 years. And what that's done is that's actually, we're not required to pay minimum wage. From a realistic standpoint, technically, we're only required to pay a federal minimum wage, not a state minimum wage. From a realistic standpoint, though, we're losing people to, they can go to work at Stop and Shop or other employers because they are paying the minimum wage. So we have adjusted our scales. Historically, we were always about $1 over the minimum wage. So we have been adjusting those scales up to try to keep us in that. So we have had some elements in different departments where people haven't come back because they're going to the private sector. So we think it is important to make sure that we have that be a competitive wage. But we are keeping it to about $1 more for over the state minimum wage.
Thank you, Chris. Questions from the board? Larry?
None for me, thank you.
Ed?
Nope. Thank you.
Michael?
Nope.
Turn it over to you.
John?
Yes, I have a
We have two
question.
placeholders, John and I.
And thank you, Roman, for meeting with us today. And thank you, like I mentioned earlier, I've met with some department heads throughout the year, Dan and I have, to learn more about their businesses and how they run their department. And first of all, I am not a golfer, but I do have a lot of golfing friends, and I've heard over the years that for some reason, and this, again, like the uncollected property tax, maybe for a bigger discussion at a later point, but I'd like to get it out there now, is that we subsidize out-of-town residents in this town at town rates for membership. And those numbers are quite large, in my opinion. For Chatham we support 164 Chatham residents in this town at resident rates. We support 41 Eastham, Orleans residents at a slightly higher than normal rate of $100 for the season. And we have 10 town employees that pay in resident rate. I do not have any issues with the town employees paying an in-town rate. I think it's a great perk for them. And what I do have an issue with is the roughly over 200 people that are paying subsidized rates in this town. And when I did the math, and I've talked to Roman about this is not new to Roman. I didn't want to blindside him or his department with this question. I come up with a number of $57,400 that I feel out-of-town residents should be paying. Now, I heard lots of arguments and discussions on why this has happened, and I still don't understand why it's continuing to happen. We may have had dwindling memberships in the past, but if someone can give me a valid reason why this is going forward and continuing to go forward, I'd like to hear those. And I don't know if Roman's the appropriate person to ask that, or the selectman, or who is, but I would like to find an answer to that question.
I think I'd like to start,
Sure.
because this is a golf committee recommendation too, so I'll have Roman.
Sure it is.
start off.
I do support the rates. I believe there was a reciprocal agreement that was informal before I came on board. I think it was 2013. And it's really had a positive impact on the revenue of the golf course. If you drop the reciprocal rate for Chatham, it becomes very competitive for the other golf courses to steal some of those members or to grab some of them. So I think I embrace the revenue they bring in and the participation they bring in. Beyond the membership rate, every member generates cart revenue. They buy burgers and drinks, and they use our driving range. So each member really, the revenue compounds. So I do support it, but I'm not that clear on the background.
Just in terms of too, I thought from attending maybe some meetings early on that we only do those towns, you mentioned Chatham and Orleans and Eastham, because we don't directly compete with other municipalities that have municipal golf courses. So
That's
Brewster
right, Eastham and
has
Orleans does not have a golf course. Chatham does, and they reciprocate.
9-hole golf.
They have a 9-hole golf course. They reciprocate. They offer Harwich residents their resident rate as well.
Angela? I was on the Board of Selectmen when this project came up, And what the thought was back then was that we were losing membership with people from the town of Harwich each year, dropping out at a rate, and this would be one way of keeping the total number up. The other part of it was a desire from the Chatham selectmen to Harwich to do some more work on their 9-hole course and allow our people to play on it. And also, there was a thought at the time to turn it over to the maintenance operation at the golf course, which would be savings involved. Unfortunately, it never came to pass because there were some issues in our department which confused everything for a couple of months and going on. We lost your predecessor, so it just stopped. I would think if the committee still wants to do it, that we should bring it back up to the Chatham selectmen or whoever, if they would like to, to continue that. But that was the reason for doing all of this. It was to keep the membership up and to combine the 9-hole course at Chatham with our 18-hole course for our people. So that's the thought.
I just want to, because I was here during that time in which Chatham approached us, and they were having, they have an outside vendor that operates their 9-hole golf course. They asked if they could partner up with us, allow for the skills and ability of the folks at Cranberry Valley to extend out to Chatham. We did have a couple sessions with them and went through, and we did offer them a package of what we thought it would take to kind of manage that, and they chose to keep it in the private sector. They just, my opinion here, they wanted to just get the money and not have to work at developing the product over there. And the proposal we had was to kind of work to develop the product as we develop our product at Cranberry Valley, and they weren't interested in necessarily doing that. So that was explored, and we were turned down by Chatham and not necessarily by us.
I just have one question on your operation. You have your own in-house people and you do your own maintenance and that kind of stuff. But do you also rely on highway? Is there a lot of, does highway support golf?
On a case-by-case basis, not often. Not often. In certain projects, they do support when needed, but not on a daily basis.
The only thing that we do have in this budget that continues is we did a intermunicipal agreement in which Sean Fernandez does the Monomoy work. So we do have a formal agreement around $82,000, somewhere in that ballpark. So we do, but that's a formal arrangement between Monomoy and the golf course. I don't think in terms of, there is collaboration certainly with the project, so we had to move some dirt, and DPW has been very helpful in moving the dirt for the cart barn. So there is a lot of cooperation. We don't record every single, as you heard earlier, we don't record all of that, but there is some coordination when it makes sense to coordinate.
Okay, I just wanted to know that. I'm all set.
I just follow up to Mike, the questions there, the responses I got from folks. If we take the logic of trying to increase membership to increase revenues by doing a subsidized rate, why don't we do that for the beaches? Why don't we do it for a lot of other town departments? If our desire is to increase revenues by reducing the rates, I don't see it as a good logic thing. Second one is, we have 830 town residents that belong to Cranberry. I've heard from them, those are some of my friends who play a lot of golf. They cannot get tee times because their tee times is allocated to these 206 people who are town residents. And they compete on the same level as Harwich residents for tee times. And so they cannot use the course because out-of-towners are using it, yet they pay the same rate as in-towners.
I just can speak to the beach sticker part. Mr. Thompson and I can remember a Cape Wide beach sticker that once came upon the scene, and we tried to implement it, and it just didn't have the legs to continue. But there, for a while, there was a real effort on all the towns, and we opened up two of our beaches, one freshwater, one saltwater, to all the other towns if they paid the beach sticker fee, so we did try that
Just on
once.
just to respond to the second part of that, we do have a Chelsea system that allows for people to come in. You certainly will probably have some people that want to play golf every single day, and the system tries to design out where it gives tee times on a priority basis. So if somebody wants to golf every single day, it is giving other people an opportunity to play. So that is very much automated to try to make it a fair system. So, you know, it's not, you shake your head, but it's not that certain people are having a distinct advantage. That's not the intent of the Chelsea system.
Ed?
Well,
Yeah, well, you know, as to the rates, as I understand it, over the years, we have pushed to adjust the rates and the revenue, and with a number of additional fees and reserve accounts, so that the golf course is not being subsidized by the property tax base. So this concept that the out-of-towners are being subsidized, I mean, I don't fully agree with that, because we're not subsidizing the in-towners at all with property tax money.
And, oh, sorry.
well, two comments. Once I see Carol back there, we don't stop people from other towns to use our community center or pay for fees there. We don't stop them from other things, so this is not unique. But one of the concerns your friends might have is 3 or 4 years ago, the new committee that was put together for golf changed a lot of the regulations that were in place at the time, which made it very, very difficult, for example, for women to get tee times and other issues like that. I don't think we need to go through all that here. You could find out. But there were changes were made. So I imagine that some of the people used to play a lot might not be happy, but that was not because of these people joining, but the changes that were made, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well.
You know,
We do have protected blocks for members. If the golf course members have about 60% of the tee times protected, that they can't be sold. Those are for Chatham residents as well as Harwich. They're all considered members. And we do an annual customer service survey, customer satisfaction survey, and it comes up that our members are in general quite satisfied with their tee time allocations.
Just quick, again, this may be a discussion for another meeting, but on the Chelsea system, the Chatham residents are treated just like Harwich residents to access that 60% time.
Yes.
So it's not like you weed out different people. And as far as the subsidizing, you can call it what you want, Ed. They don't pay the same rate as Harwich residents. They pay the same rate as a Harwich residents. They should be paying out-of-town rates, in my opinion. Regardless of how you want to do it. They're out-of-towners. Unless there's some municipal reciprocating agreement that we get from Chatham, a clamming license or something, I don't think we should be subsidizing $60,000 worth of people.
You have a nine-hole.
Could wrap this up.
Michael?
Thank you, Roman. Certainly, this is something that the golf committee, through your direction, Roman, could take up again. I do remember, in reading back all of the conversations, this has come up before, and all of this revenue from the out-of-towners was used to offset the golf course costs because of declining membership. So having the conversation on the impact, if you went with a proposal like John's, then, but that would be a committee conversation and then back to us after the fact. My only other question, sorry, Angelo, is, Chris, could you just give us a very brief update on where we stand with the electric company on the cart barn? Because that
Yes.
could have a major impact on
Right.
town funds at some point.
And Roman may have, he sent me a picture yesterday.
We have electricity, temporary power.
So there's two issues. One issue is that we need to get the cart barn operational. So the building is up, and we were having a real struggle. Well, we have two struggles, if you would, with the Eversource folks. One is the bigger picture regarding the solar, And then the second was, they didn't even wanna relocate take off the meter from the old cart barn to put onto the new one, so we couldn't go in and demo it. So something that should have been a 2-day project became a 2.5-week project, but they came out yesterday and they took that off. What that has done is that obviously keeps delaying us, because we can't demo a building and prep the area for paving, because we can't take live power and cut it off of a building ourselves. So in terms of that was finished yesterday. He was nice enough to send me a image of the trucks rolling in. So the temporary service for the cart barn is there. On last Thursday or the Thursday before, CVAC had about 6 vendors show up to do solar on the roof, and we're waiting for the return on that to see if we have any vendors that want to do that project for us. So that will be a separate. And then the real question is on the solar. In order to have the solar, we need to have 3-phase power, and that gets to the primary issue with Eversource of the easement. They want to have us take and have it from the cart barn all the way to Oak Street, and the town has taken the position that they've had a long-standing easement from Oak Street all the way into the pump house, and they now want us to do work on their easement, which is not really appropriate. We are trying to get numbers to see what the cost would be to do it on our own, to see if it's worth the continued aggravation of dealing with Eversource.
Angelo had a question? Is that
Okay,
right?
yeah, I get-
Just to follow up on that, Chris. So we shouldn't see any impact in the FY '20 budget based on timeline at this point?
We anticipate that the cart barn will be operational, so, and that we are still planning on doing the paving work. But on the solar most likely will hit in the '21 budget.
Thank you.
A couple of weeks ago, the selectmen were talking about revenue that is developed from various departments, and it was very clear that there's some constraints. One constraint is you should not be generating more revenue than you have costs. 2, that you should cover your costs, which I believe is being done. And that the town does not pay out of taxes at all for anything that goes on there, virtually, at least there. When you put in some of the cart barn, maybe, but there is money there that is covered. And I think in talking about the Chatham folk and whatnot, that should be it's a whole different system. It's not money that's the issue. The issue is who should be there, basically, and who should be playing. And decisions have been made on that, that's all.
Just to the point of virtual, and I won't prolong this, but there was 3 old appropriations that were made that were funded from the taxpayer. And I appreciate Roman and Sean have looked at it, so they've agreed this year to pay a portion of that. I think all that debt service falls off in 2024. It's not that much longer that we'll be fully off of, but the cart barn project is anticipated to be 100% paid by the fees generated by the golf course.
Okay, I think we've
Got
had
wastewater.
enough discussion. There's no other budget questions, correct? So let's just, thank you, Roman, very much for
Thanks, Roland.
all
Thanks,
of your
Roman.
information. We appreciate it.
And then the last one here for this morning is wastewater. And I'm gonna plan on, I guess, commenting on the wastewater budget. I do recognize that we have folks from the Water Commission here still, and we do have a article on to convert from the Water Commission to a Water Wastewater Commission. Obviously, as an article, I don't know if there's any discussion that people want to have on that, but while they're here, I mean, if there's any questions, I think it would probably be worthwhile to have a discussion. The language that is in that article has not been changed, or it has been changed a little bit from last year, the concerns that were raised. And we've distributed what I believe to be the language that has been voted by the Board of Selectmen and by the Water Commission for the final version that is there now. So if there are any questions, I guess the opportunity would be to address that. In terms of the wastewater budget, last year, we did set up a enterprise account for sewer enterprise. And sorry, the statutes say sewer, so I have to use the word sewer for the enterprise account. In terms of it, last year, we had budgeted 70,000. We did not have any plans to utilize that with the idea that that would fall and go to retained earnings. In the past year, there's been a couple of items that have come up. So this budget goes from 70,000 to 250,000. And let me just walk through what that is. So ultimately, by 2022, we probably will hook up to the town of Chatham and start to have to pay the obligations under the IMA. That is anticipated to be about $250,000 to $275,000 for our portion of the buy-in to the plant for the flow that goes in and so forth. We're obligated to pay their operator for our portion of the design of the plant, which is 23%. So we do need to raise this amount in order to create a subsidy from taxpayer dollars to get to that 250,000 ultimately. The idea is to increase in 21 and 22 to build that up to the level that we need to be to subsidize. This year, there was some drivers from the board, and just to break out the pieces, there was a request to fund a project manager. That would be a position. We do have an RFP out on the street now. I don't know what the date is, when that's due back, the 15th of March, so that's due back in a little bit to see if we could have someone. The idea behind that would be to budget that at approximately $100,000. And then the two other pieces, the CWMP, which is the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, which is the vehicle that funds the overall project, the 40 years, 8 phases, that if we're gonna sign up with DHY, Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth, that there has to be some revisions to that plan. So there has been some material that's been generated. It will be on for a future board meeting to have a more full-length discussion on the full impact of that. But this budget does carry $25,000 to make those adjustments to the CWMP. So the biggest adjustment is that we had anticipated, if you would, kind of finishing East Harwich first and then moving to the center of the town and to the western part of the town to do that work. And now the center part of the town, the facility at the DPW is not contemplated, and we would join in a joint facility with Dennis and Yarmouth in the town of Dennis. That savings alone is $40 million on just the capital cost for the plant. But that would necessitate an amendment, if you would, to the CWMP. So I have an estimate from CDM in the neighborhood of $25,000 for that. On DHY, DHY is a regional agreement, negotiation of the regional agreement. The town has been pretty fortunate that we signed up with the other two towns. I believe the town of Yarmouth was able to obtain a grant to have that work be done through the grant. So all the money that has been expended, and I know Larry and Don sit in these meetings on a monthly basis to go over it with DHY, but that grant expires in June. And it now appears that that work won't be done by June, and that project probably will move into the next, potentially even into the next fiscal year. So to continue our portion of that, it's my understanding that Dennis and Yarmouth are raising a similar amount of money to continue their efforts, but that's $25,000. And then the third component, and this would be $100,000 from free cash, that there was a request from the Wastewater Support Committee to fund folks that want to hook up to the sewer. We're paying for, the taxpayers are paying for all the costs to bring the sewer down in the plant. We are not paying for the costs related to people to hook up. So from the town property line into the house, that obligation is on the homeowner. They currently have a couple of different vehicles that they could use to offset their costs. One of the vehicles they could do is to go, and this is estimated about $5,000 to $7,000 roughly is the number, but they can go and get a mortgage or a second mortgage, which a lot of people in Chatham apparently do. The second option, they can go to the county and the county has a septic loan program. The septic loan program currently has an interest rate of 5%, so they have a 2% administrative fee and then a 3% interest fee for how much they borrow money for. There was a request from, I believe even the Board of Selectmen had expressed some interest in looking at this and pursuing this to see if we could negotiate something with the county where the county has to charge the 3% because they're borrowing money at 3%. So if the town were to contribute money, $100,000 in this case, that 3% would go away and only the 2% administration charge would have to be assessed to the residents. And that would be income-driven, so those standards and elements would have to be worked out and agreed to by the Board of Selectmen and by the county. At least from discussions, preliminary discussions with the county, they are amenable to doing that. So if we had certain income factors that were met, people could sign up and get a loan for that $5,000 to $7,000 to hook up their system at their home. We add a 2%, basically the cost of their administration fee, without any of the interest charges. So those are the 4 components that make this up. I would certainly, as time goes on, the CWMP update and the DHY efforts would no longer be needed in the second year, and the project management that just assists in the people hooking up hopefully would also be able to go away, and we would move towards our goal of having enough money to subsidize when we ultimately do connect in with the town of Chatham.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions from the board?
No.
Larry? Ed? Don? Michael?
Colebrook, Chris, that's been a conversation. Apparently, there was supposed to be a new contract with CDM Smith for Colebrook, or is that existing contract to get that to the next phase?
That's part of the Colebrook project, so that was part of the $2 million that was appropriated 2 years ago.
So no more money to CDM Smith in FY '21?
We don't anticipate any requests relative to Colebrook at this point.
Okay, so the update, we haven't seen the proposal on the update yet?
No, I think we have March 18th, Dave Young is coming in to do the overview.
Okay. And then at that point, I guess we're gonna see the difference between the $240 million plan and the now $300 million plan?
Correct.
And maybe we can get a sense for the finance committee as well as the residents, what it's gonna look like 15 years from now, since none of that was included in the original CWP?
Yeah, you know, it's a very fair question. Certainly in the original design, you know, my look at it is that the folks from CDM had to make a decision in terms of how they were gonna propose the plan to the town. So they did pick and choose, if you would, that in 2012, they did an estimate based upon actual costs for 2012, and they did not put inflationary factors into that. And now you're looking at phase 3. Phase 3 is anticipated for 2022, so they have updated the numbers, which the original numbers were $240 million. They've updated the numbers based upon inflationary numbers from 2012 to 2018, where we are now, and then they've done projections out to 2022. So what they've tried to do is to look at that. The net impact of that, if the program stayed exactly as it is, the 240 would go to 300 million. The value is that the original program actually had us signing up with the town of Chatham. So the savings that were realized were anticipated. The original CWMP did not include us having a regional facility in the town of Dennis. So instead of having our own plant on our own DPW at, I don't remember the exact dollar amount, I want to say $60 million, something in that range, we're now contributing to, if DHY comes to full fruition, that we would pay 16% of the total cost of that plant, and that savings would be about $40 million. So we've gone from 240 to 300 based upon updating for inflation up to 2022, the 300 million, and because we did not anticipate any of the savings from DHY, that would then be adjusted down to 260 million. And that probably is gonna be a lot longer discussion, but just to provide a little bit of a recap.
Yeah,
So, Chris, just on that, I think, you know, right now we're making an assumption that DHY is gonna happen. I think we've agreed that maybe we should. The numbers that are being floated and the change of doing our own plant versus using their plant, there seems to be a huge disconnect between what's in the CWMP by way of costs when we were gonna do it and joining the DHY. I'm hoping David Young can, when he meets with us, can shed some light on the differences in costs. But, you know, as we talk about money for project managers and going forward on this, Dan Pelletier was hired. Part of why he was hired was sewer. It was in the ad, he applied for it, showed us his credentials, and got the job. Now we're looking at spending upwards of $100,000 on a project manager, and I've said it before, but I would urge you and CDM Smith to start using Dan Pelletier and to speak to the water commissioners about using him and his expertise on some of what we're doing. And I know we're coming forward to talk about what type of pumps we've chosen. And it's my understanding that we're not using our local expertise and the person that we're gonna hand this over to make some of these decisions. So when we have this conversation next week, you know, looking at a project manager versus looking at somebody that we've already hired, I think we really need to look at what we're doing.
I just, for the general public, you know, Dan Pelletier has been a great resource to us. He has met with people on an individual basis to go look. Could he do more? I don't disagree with that at all. But, you know, the board, by kind of a majority vote, wanted to pursue this project manager effort. So that's why we're pursuing that element of it.
Dawn? Yeah, sure, except I was gonna let Dawn.
Well, let him.
All right, go
because
ahead,
I'm-
Alan.
I'm going to double back.
I noticed when we printed out our muni budget, one of the pages under our account of 432 did list support future wastewater costs and septic loan funding. That 250,000 is in that, are going to be in that account. But last year I mentioned, you know, yes, we're on board to move ahead, to join with you, to oversee wastewater. And yes, Dan Pelletier has given a lot of time. My problem is that at some point, and I did say last year, when you're going to put some money in the budget to offset, you know, his costs, his wages. We pay, the water department pays the town for town administrator and the services that the town does give to the water department. Well, I think it's only fair in return. If we're going to use Dan, I think you need to put some money in the budget to offset his time, rather than let the enterprise fund carry the load. And I think that's important. And there's a lot of stuff that needs to be taken care of. And you know, we're just seeing it for what he's doing, just for the good. He's met with all kinds of folks in East Harwich and attempted to put them on the right track. And I think it makes sense to, if we're going to take it over, if we're going to run, then let's do it the right way and you know, do the right thing with this. And like I say, we had the discussion about the submersible pumps and the wet wells and all that. And I personally agree with Dan. It's a hell of a lot easier to service something that's out of the waste and rather than in it. And they don't come out well when they're in the wet wells and last longer and look better from above. So I have my concerns, is, you know, the financial aspects of it, and I think you need to take a look at it, and you're going to spend $100,000 for somebody else, and
Michael?
put something in the budget.
Thank you, Alan. With all due respect, you were part of the hiring of Dan, and in his application and in the job description included what you're asking us to pay him different. So if we're gonna have that conversation, it should be a conversation at a different time, I think.
Yeah,
But
okay.
he applied for and got the job for
That's
a
correct.
certain thing. So adding money now is asking after the fact to change his job description that he actually applied for and to pay them more money. So I don't want to get into it now because it's not part of this budget, but we
Yeah,
did apply for that.
Just to kind of comment too on that, and I think we're on pretty much the same page. Technically, by having a sewer enterprise fund, all the time I put in should be assessed to the sewer enterprise fund. All the time that Dan puts in should be assessed to the sewer enterprise fund. We're being hard pressed to come up with the $250,000 we're gonna need to pay to subsidize the Chatham connection. And again, we're paying subsidized Chatham connection because we're gonna have not enough people hooked up to be able to do that. Chatham continues to subsidize 10 years in, so we will be in the subsidy. The question is, I mean, what level do you wanna subsidize to? So if we're gonna go above the 250 and go to 300 and then have some money go for, you know, my salary, so we can fund that from the taxpayers to that and to Dan, it's all appropriate, certainly under enterprise fund rules and regs. Is it financially, you know, something that's doable? So, you know, I think we've been kind of absorbing these dollars at this point in order to try to save the taxpayers in the long run.
Thank you, Chris. Don?
Yeah, I'd like to double back a second, because it's not about this budget particularly, but it is about the budget. You're talking about when CDM Smith comes in, a projection that only goes to 2022 is virtually worthless to me. Worthless, because we did not inflate, apparently, the original figures, and that resulted in a rounding error of like $40 million right there. My problem here is, when you go out and buy a car, say, you go out and you ask them, okay, what kind of terms can I get? What's a lease gonna cost me per month? What's buying it over 4 years, paying back a loan gonna cost me? This has everything to do with the fact that our borrowings are gonna go all over the place. You're not just changing, DHY changes the sequence of the plan, and it thereby changes the cost per month of the car that I'm talking about. The system itself is going to wind up costing our taxpayers a different amount in different years. So 2022 doesn't mean too much. Where are we going to experience that blip? Because we're clearly pulling this from future years back and making it more near term. Am I wrong here?
Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong. I think the one thing that at least I try to visualize, and, you know, having a 40-year plan over 8 phases is something that takes a little bit.
Let's talk 2, not
But
40.
But the reality is that if we were planning on building a $60 million plant of our own, and now we don't have to build a $60 million plant on our own, and again, I wish people wouldn't hold me to these numbers because they're estimates, but let's just say it's a $60 million plant. If we're now gonna be 16% of a plant that's gonna cost $100 million, because it's obviously gonna have more flow to it, it's a distinct advantage to the town to consider doing that.
We're in fiscal 2020 that we're looking at right here. You're only pulling us into 2022 in your estimates. That's not long enough in a 40-year plan to see what the impact changes are going to be. Moreover, and we did discuss this in DHY, although the board and the FinCom don't know this, the assumption for the savings was that we build our own plant. It had no contemplation whatsoever that we might actually pay Chatham to expand their capacity and hook in that way. So that was never considered, but certainly phasing this in a way that we could pay for it as a community did factor into it. 75%, between 70 and 75% of it is, according to Dave Young, is our cost 100% to the pipes in the ground
Pipes
in
in
the
the
town.
ground are 100%.
So you're talking about changing the burden of the pipes in the ground that are gonna be there in either scenario. Yes, because we're gonna change the year that we're borrowing for those pipes in the ground. We're gonna be doing it earlier than the CWMP calls for. And that needs to be part of that discussion, because we're gonna be sitting here in 2 years talking about a budget, and that's real money to people, where they start talking about, okay, but what's my tax bill gonna do? You're taking something that was maybe in year 12 or year 15 and pulling it back, adding it on, because the pipes are our responsibility. They're not gonna be Dennis's or Yarmouth's. And that's the majority of the cost of implementing this, because you can't There's no sense in having a sewer plant if you can't have pipes that deliver something to it. We are gonna put pipes in the ground. They're gonna be pretty expensive, and we had currently sequenced that to spread it out so that the budget implications of our operating budget plus our borrowings weren't gonna cripple people. So his analysis has to be more than 2 years inflation. It has to show what years these things are gonna hit now compared to what years they would have hit when we're not even talking about this.
Larry?
Yeah, let me very quickly just, we've covered a lot of things here.
Yeah, we're gonna get enough, of course.
One is the project manager. Michael, you raised that again, but we've brought that up in several, and debated that probably 2 years now. And it was to fill a position to not only what Dan is doing, and Dan, obviously, and Megan has been a great help, but it's overall communication, it's fulfilling the DEP requirements. It's all this activity going forward to be sure that we're making the phase 2 proceed as well as we can. It also is in line with our overall charter change, which has said that the Board of Selectmen will be the water commissioner role to fulfill the CWMP requirements. Once pipes are in the line, we're going to turn over to the wastewater water department. So we're trying to keep those isolated and move ahead. Yeah, I'm sure we'll always go back and rethink that, but that was, we've debated that, boiled that for some time. I would try to separate, Don, your comments. There are two things. One is, what does DHY change in terms of our next phase? And that we need to get. From day one, we've had discussions on how do we measure potential costing going over 240 years, 240 million. So those were based on present, as Chris has stated, the value of 212. We debated, I know Angela and I used to debate this some. At that time, do you use present value of money that you do in normal economics to look forward how it would be? We have Dave Young looking at the engineering inflation numbers, which is another way of looking at it. Initially, we decided to base that on just what the dollar value was at 212, because we kept stressing that the CWMP will vary over time. It's a living document. We don't know what technology is going to come out. We're going to know, we may learn, for instance, based on the East Harwich what's going on, that the phase north of East Harwich, maybe that's not needed. We can pull that out because we'll have removed enough nitrogen. So we didn't spend, we hadn't looked at that precision of $240 million is now being asked to put precision on. And I quite frankly don't know how we do that over a 40-year period. So I agree we need to look at especially the phasing going forward. We need to understand those numbers, Michael. I agree with that, what the assumptions are. But those are the thought processes going into it.
Right, and the one thing I'll ask everybody is to, let's stay focused first on the RFP, that's where we were going, the project manager, that's where we were going first with this discussion, before we get into the next discussion. That's a discussion we're gonna have on March 18th with CDM. I don't really see a benefit to having that full discussion here. So if it's a comment about the project manager, let's go ahead, but.
The only comment I have is based on the RFP we sent out. I think that there was little thought that we were going to get an actual response to the RFP in the detail that we had, and that's why I think it's relevant to the budget. And I also think relevant to the budget is we have an employee, and regardless what the board voted for an RFP, I would ask that we start using the employee as much as we can for the wastewater project, since he is going to inherit it.
So I think we are using him quite extensively, and I think we're also using Board of Health as well. And, we did debate this for multiple times, and again, I guess what I'm asking is, we're talking about the line item of the 100,000 in there for the project manager. If we're gonna talk about that more, then I think that's more of a board discussion. Again, right now, we're doing the budget. Does anyone else have any comments on that piece of the budget? Dana?
Not that piece, just on the budget overall. As we have it right now, the 70,000 that we have for this year is gonna go into retained earnings for next year.
Correct. We don't have any overt spending on that,
Right.
so it'd be go to retained.
And then of the 250, you outlined spending 155, and then
150 for the project manager, CWMP and DHY, that would be part of the, built into the tax base with the idea that that helps create the subsidy when we hook up with Chatham in 2022. And then 100,000 would be kind of a one-time money that we would do for the loan program.
so you anticipate of the
Free cash.
250, you'd spend it all in 2020,
Yes.
and there would be none going to retain earnings on that one. Okay, that was my question.
Don?
Yeah, and actually, to go further on that, that was what I was going to say. If anybody has the impression that we're doing 100,000 for the project manager as a one-off and that's it, you're never going to see that again, I think that's a mistake, because as we do new hookups, if we're really getting a project manager, it's more than just we're helping you get through something that we need help with too, because we haven't done it before. Even if we've done it before, you've got to have sequencing of hookups and watching, the construction costs in whatever we do beyond that project. So it's going to show up again.
Yeah, any questions from this side? Anything else we want to add to this conversation?
Just one
John?
quick question. When's the first sewer flow into Chatham?
It's anticipated that construction starts this summer, so it's a 2-year construction cycle, so it'd be 2021, 2022 that we would actually send flow to Chatham.
Chatham, thank you.
We good?
Good from our side.
Okay.
Lunch.
Thank you, Chris.
Lunch.
And it's still on time.
And we're still on time. Some of us were late.
Oh, yeah.